Who else are you listening to this podcast with? The latest from our daily newsletter at podnews.net. First, thank you. About 4 hours ago, we hit subscriber number 25,000 to our email newsletter. Thank you to Neil and everyone who posted about us on your socials. We hugely appreciate it, and we are indeed your friend for life. In the news today, SXM Media has discovered when and where people listen to podcasts with others. 12% of podcast listeners often listen with someone else, and the company has calculated that podcast advertising gets 5% more impressions from those co-listeners. Listening with someone else is most likely to happen in the car or when cooking and eating. Comedy is the most co-listened genre. The data was conducted with Edison Research and Cara. The spotlight is focusing on Spotify's podcasting business. Sky Pillsbury has published an oral history of Gimlet's slow demise. After interviewing 5 current and former Gimlet staffers, Ariel Shapiro takes a look at Spotify's practice of making its podcasts exclusive and also notes that The Ringer didn't make any layoffs. And Ashley Carman suggests that Spotify is refining its strategy. Africa Podcast Day is to return next year, the continent's biggest podcast event. It'll be in Nairobi in Kenya on February the 12th. The event is looking for sponsors. We are a media partner. The Rode X is coming, says a mysterious YouTube video. Any idea? No, us neither. Evergreen Podcasts is making a popular HR podcast, the Chad and Cheese podcast, in 4 additional languages: French, German, Spanish and Portuguese. Edison Research and NPR will release the spoken word audio report on October the 27th. Edison Research has shared some data from their Share of Ear study, showing that more people listen to personality and talk shows on podcasts than on the radio. In France, ACPM's Ranker says downloads are up 18% year-on-year in the country. Transfer from Slate, not that Slate, is number 1. The TV production arm of Comcast in the UK, Sky Studios, has signed a first-look deal for Tortoise Media's podcasts. And apparently Instagram influencer Mike Graham is on track to become the future of podcasting. The article we're linking to today doesn't actually explain why, but does mention he's producing a podcast called Fried vs. Tapped, which will come out later this year in video. Thank you to Jody Avirgan for becoming our latest personal supporter. Jody's taken advantage of buying a year's worth of support via our Patreon page, so we get the benefit. You should be like Jody too at podnews.net/support. And it boosts today. Too many electrons died for these sats, says Joe Rowe. Thank you also to Real Coach Andy, to Dave Jones, who asks, will Spotify run the brand safety tool on any of their own shows or just those of others? Good question. And Medus, who just says, thank you for the show. If you get value out of this podcast, you can hit that boost button. What, you don't have one? Then you need a new podcast app at podnews.net/new podcast apps. And in podcast news, the weekly review show from Podnews, Podland this week, has Todd Cochran talking about the early days of his podcast, Geek News Central.
Then I heard about this Daily Source Code podcast with Adam Perry and Dave Weiner, and I caught the fever.
Also on the show, Alban Brooke with new things from Buzzsprout. Decoder with Nilay Patel had Mark Zuckerberg on this week as a guest. The boss of Meta talked about the new Quest Pro headset and said, there's some reason why you want to do the podcast in person. There's a connection you have in person. There's a reason why you didn't want to do this over Zoom. Tune into 48 Hours on CBS tomorrow, and you'll see the host and creator of true crime podcast Bloodtown, Penny Dearmin. She was interviewed on 2 occasions for Saturday's broadcast about her experience with the show's featured case, The Strange Death of Dr. Shockley. Pod Save America has a special guest of President Barack Obama in its next episode. He last appeared 2 years ago, before Trump lost the election and before the January 6th attack on the Capitol building. Spotify released its latest episode of Spotify Discover This, focused on its audiobook strategy and the culture around audiobooks. The episode features discussions with industry professionals and Nir Zickerman, Spotify's global head of audiobooks, about his vision for audiobooks in the future. Uncurated is back for a new season based on objects inside the University of Melbourne's 12 museums and collections. The first episode topped the iTunes Australia charts for visual arts podcasts. We're told we had a launch party and we wanted to see if we could make it happen if we got everyone attending to subscribe and give us 5 stars at the same time. And it worked. Don't tell everybody. And that's the latest from our newsletter. To read all the stories and subscribe, we're at podnews.net.